Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you a review of Middlegame by Seanan McGuire. Middlegame came out last year. It was one of my most anticipated new releases of 2019, and I pre-ordered it, got it the day it came out, and then it sat on my shelf until now. This has been nominated for a Hugo Award for the Best Novel of the Year. It has reached the shortlist, and if you have seen my video about reading the finalists for 4 Hugo categories, you will know that this is on my TBR for that kind of project. And I'll link that video above if you're interested in checking it out. But I knew I wanted to pick this up soon. I don't really know anything about it, and I sort of didn't really know what to expect because I've heard the people who have read it have loved it, but I hadn't really heard anything beyond that. So when my friend Angela from Literature Science Alliance offered to buddy read this with me, I snapped up the opportunity, and I'm so glad that we read this and that I had the chance to read it with a friend, because this was a great book to discuss and kind of like freak out over and just talk about how much I loved it with someone else. So this was a fantastic read for me, and it was just amazing. So just really quickly, this is a book that I bought myself. This was not sent to me for review by a publisher. I'm reviewing it anyway, and also this is going to be a spoiler-free review. That does mean that I have to leave out some things, some of my favorite aspects of the book, but if you ever want to talk about this, if you have read it, if you're planning on reading it, whatever, just let me know. I've said a couple of times in videos where I've talked about this book that it's basically impossible to kind of summarize without having read it, because the description that is on the inside of the cover makes absolutely no sense. So I was like, okay, well, as soon as I finish reading it, I'll be able to summarize it really easily. That is not the case. This is a very complex and complicated book. I'm gonna do my best, but basically this book follows 3 main characters. The first is sort of think like a Frankenstein's monster type creature who has been created by a great alchemist, and he ends up kind of taking on his master's work after she passes away. That work is to reach a place called the Impossible City, which will basically be this kind of huge gateway into controlling the world somehow. The way that he's doing this is through basically sets of twins who have sort of the powers of the universe through language and through mathematics, split between the 2 of them. So one specializes in mathematics, the other specializes in languages, and they're basically sent out into the world to be raised separately, and when they come together, they're going to be able to create this great power and unlock the Impossible City. That makes no sense. I'm well aware. So we follow one of these sets of twins. We have Roger, who is the one who specializes in language, and Dodger, who is his twin sister, who specializes in mathematics. And there's lots of fantasy stuff that goes on in this book, obviously, but really at the heart of it, this book is about 2 kids who are separated at birth and still have this kind of incredible connection, and they are growing up with each other but still separate because they have this incredible ability to communicate basically psychically. All of this is like the worst description ever. It's a really difficult book to summarize, but at its core it is about 2 children at various points in their lives growing up and discovering that they have this sibling and they can do these incredible things. I will admit that a lot of the alchemy and the sort of the Impossible City and the Improbable Road and all of this made no sense to me. None. I couldn't tell you what the Impossible City does, how people get this power, why it has to be through this particular method, any of that. None of the alchemy makes any goddamn sense to me, but that didn't take away from my enjoyment of the book. There are some books where even though you don't necessarily grasp all the concepts, Yoon Ha Lee's Nine Fox Gambit is a perfect example of this. I had no idea what was going on in that book because it was all math, but it was still an incredible and really enjoyable read that I loved. This is so much like that. There is so much just flying around in this book that completely went over my head, but I kind of like grasped enough for it to still be an enjoyable read and a enjoyable kind of process to learn about. You would think that, you know, if you're not necessarily getting kind of like the point of the book, the whole point is to get to the impossible city, and there's so much that I don't understand. You'd think that that would detract from my enjoyment, but that absolutely was not the case. So if you read this book and a lot of that goes over your head, I don't think it would necessarily be a problem ultimately. So the way that Seanan McGuire writes childhood and children and childhood experiences is just incredible. It's one of my favorite things about her writing, and it's one of the reasons that I love the Wayward Children books so much. The thing that really drew me to those, especially in Every Heart a Doorway, is the way that she talks about childhood and talks about sort of those lonely days of your childhood, but they can still be the best days of your life. The days when you didn't have these kinds of pressures and obligations, but you did still have problems that grown-ups kind of ignored. The way that she talks about childhood is so wonderful, and there's something about it that's just, it's not patronizing like you can get sometimes with adults writing children, especially young children. It's just so realistic and so wonderful, and it has this kind of incredible nostalgic quality. I love her writing, and Middlegame was no different. So much of this book is about the two of them growing up, and even though they are separated, they are on different coasts of the United States, they still have their best friend, who just happens to be what they think is an imaginary friend. And the way that they grow up and influence each other as they are growing and how they sort of change each other is really wonderful. I love the sibling relationship in this book. It's just wonderful, especially as someone who does have a sibling and someone whose sibling is their best friend. This was just so wonderful to read because I love, 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 love sibling relationships in books, and this is one of the best. We have a few point of view characters in this book. Obviously, Roger and Dodger are the most important ones. I loved them both. I was fully expecting to relate much more to Roger, who is the one who has this kind of incredible affinity for languages and for words, because math and science is so not my thing, and that was me as a kid. I loved English, I loved words, I loved reading. But I also ended up really enjoying Dodger because even though she has this incredible mathematical brain, which, like, all of her love of numbers goes totally over my head because it's not my thing at all, she has this incredible loneliness to her because she talks so much about being, you know, the smart girl, and how being the smart girl is not okay, and talking about how, you know, other girls who are kind of the smart girl like her shun her, and the boys don't like the fact that she is as smart, if not smarter than them, so no one really talks to her. She kind of gets picked on a little bit. And that was so incredibly powerful, and that was a really fantastic way of viewing these two kids who are so incredibly similar in so many ways, but one of them thrives a little bit more and the other is kind of like this outcast genius type. I don't want to talk about my favorite character in this book because if I do, I think it'll be a big spoiler. However, there's a secondary character who kind of comes into their own a little bit more in the story and becomes a much more important character who I loved. They're the exact kind of character that I just completely adore. I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to spoil anything for you guys, but like, just the way that she has written this particular person is like perfect for me. Absolutely perfect. I just thought that their addition to the story was perfectly timed because we're kind of, when they start to become more of an important figure in the story, is kind of the point where I feel like I could have maybe gotten a little bit bored with the relationship. But this person kind of threw a wrench in everything and just sort of elevated the story again and made it so much more fun and interesting. So that was amazing, and I absolutely adored them. This book is complex, it is complicated, we have so much messing around with time and timelines, we have so much messing around with mathematics and kind of language, and it's so incredibly clever. This feels like a book that maybe Seanan McGuire has been building up to writing for a long time. I would actually be really curious to see if she's done any interviews talking about the writing of this book, because this doesn't feel like something that you kind of come up with one day and you start to outline. This is something that percolates in your brain for years before you can even put pen to paper. I have a feeling that she poured a lot of her heart and soul into these characters and a lot of her sort of skills that she's learned writing a million books into this, because this is just a beautiful piece of fiction, I think. This is easily one of the best books of the year, and it's one of the best books I've read in a very long time. So overall, I gave Middlegame 5 out of 5 stars. I adored this book. I really implore you to pick this up if it has been sitting on your shelf, if you've been unsure. It's just a brilliant book. It's so good. I think that you would really, really enjoy it if you like the same kind of things that I do, which presumably you're on this channel because you do enjoy the kinds of books that I like. So if you think that this sounds kind of interesting, if it sort of like captured your interest a little bit, I would highly recommend going ahead and picking it up. It's just great. A really quick note at the very end of this, there is a very, very important and necessary storyline that involves attempted suicide. It's not hugely graphic, but it is fairly graphic. So if that's something that you think would be harmful for you, I would definitely avoid this book, because while it is important and it is necessary, it is a little bit rough going, I think. So just as a heads up, if that's something that you're not interested in reading, this might not be the book for you. So that is it for my review of Middlegame by Seanan McGuire. I would love to know if you have read this book, if it's on your radar, if you are interested in it whatsoever. Please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.